Chronicles of Narnia. Let's see. Chapter 4. The Bell and the Hammer. That's with that crazy lady. Chapter 4. The Bell and the Hammer. There was no doubt about the magic this time. Down, down they rushed, first through darkness, then through a mass of vague and whirling shapes, which might have been almost anything. It grew lighter, and then suddenly they felt that they were standing on something solid. A moment later, everything came into focus, and they were able to look about them. "What a weird place," said Diggory. "I don't like it," said Polly with something like a shudder. What they noticed first was the light. It wasn't like sunlight, and it wasn't like electric light, or lamps, or candles, or any other light that they had ever seen. It was a dull and rather red light, not at all cheerful. It was steady and did not flicker. They were standing on a flat, paved surface, and buildings rose all around them. There was no roof overhead, and they were in a sort of courtyard. The sky was extraordinarily dark, a blue that was almost black. When you had seen that sky, you wondered that there should even be any light at all. "It's very funny weather here," said Diggory. "I wonder if we've arrived just in time for a thunderstorm or an eclipse." "Well, I don't like it," said Polly. Both of them, quite without knowing why, were talking in a whisper. And, there we go. They were talking in a whisper. Oh, no! Standing on a flat paved surface. They were talking in whispers, and both of them, without quite knowing why, were talking in whispers, and though there was no reason why they should still go on, holding hands after their jump, they didn't let go. The walls rose very high all round that courtyard. They had many great windows in them, windows without glass, through which you saw nothing but black darkness. Lower down there were great pillared arches, yawning blackly, like the mouths of railway tunnels. It was rather cold. The stone of which everything was built seemed to be red, but that might only be because of the curious light. It was obviously very old. Many of the flat stones that paved the courtyard had cracks across them. None of them fitted closely together, and the sharp corners were all worn off. One end of the arched doorways was half filled. Was half filled with rubble. The two children kept on turning round and round, to look at the different sides of the courtyard. One reason was that they were afraid. Let's see. One reason that they were still afraid, and I lost my way again. One reason was that they were afraid of somebody or something looking out of those windows and at them when their backs were turned. "Do you think anyone lives here?" said Diggory at last, still in a whisper. "No," said Polly. "It's all in ruins. We haven't heard a sound since we came." Let's stand still and listen for a bit," suggested Diggory. They stood still and listened, but they could not. But all they could hear was thumping of their own hearts. This place was at least as quiet as the wood between the worlds. But it was a different kind of quietness. The silence of the wood had been rich and warm. You could almost hear the trees growing, and full of life. This was a dead, cold, empty silence. You couldn't imagine anything growing in it. "Let's go home," said Polly. "But we haven't gotten to see anything yet," said Dickory. "Now we're here, and we simply must have a look round." "Well, I'm sure there's nothing at all interesting here." "Well, that's not much point of finding a magic ring that lets you into another world if you're afraid to look at 'em when you got there." "Who's talking about being afraid?" said Polly. "Who's talking about being afraid?" said Polly, letting go of Dickory's hand. "Well, I thought you'd only I thought you didn't seem very keen on exploring this place." "Well, I'll go anywhere you go." "Well, we can get away the moment we want to," said Dickory. "Let's take off our green rings and put them in our right-hand pockets. All we got to do is remember that our yellow ones are in our left-hand pockets. You can keep your hands near your pocket as you like, but don't put in or you'll touch your but don't put it in or you'll touch your yellow one and vanish." There we go. They did this and went quietly up one of the big arched doorways which led into the inside of the building. And when they stood on the threshold, they could look in. They saw that it was not so dark inside, and they thought at first it led into a vast, shadowy hall which appeared to be empty. But on the far side there was a row of pillars with arches between them. Looking through those arches, there seemed in some sort of same tired-looking light. But on the far side of the row of pillars, which with arches between them, and through those arches there streamed in some more of the same tired-looking light. They crossed the hall, walking very carefully, for fear of holes in the floor, if anything. For fear of holes in the floor of anything lying about that they might trip over. It seemed a long walk. When they had reached the other side, they came out through the arches and found themselves in another larger courtyard. "Well, this doesn't look very safe." "That doesn't... well, that doesn't... "Well, that doesn't look very safe," said Polly, pointing at a place where the wall bulged outwards and looked as if it were ready to fall over into the courtyard. In one place a pillar was missing between two arches, and the bit that came down where the top of the pillar ought to have been, there hung there with nothing to support it. Clearly the place had been deserted for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. "If it lasted till now, I suppose it'll last a bit longer," said Dickory. "But we must be very quiet. You know, noise sometimes brings things down like an avalanche in the Alps." They went out into the courtyard, into another doorway, and up a great flight of steps through the vast rooms, and opened out into one another, until you were dizzy with the mere size of the place. Every now and then they thought that they were going to get out into the open and see what sort of country lay around the enormous place. But each time they only got into another courtyard. They must have been magnificent places when people were still living in there. In one there had been a fountain. A great stone monster with widespread wings stood with its mouth open, and you could see a bit of piping at the back of its mouth, out of which the water used to pour. Under it was a wide stone basin to hold the water, but it was dry as a bone. In other places there were dry sticks of some sort of climbing plant which had wound itself round the pillars, and helped to pull some of them down. But it had died long ago, and there were no ants or spiders of any of the sort of living things you'd expect to see in a ruin, and there were dry earth shone between the broken flagstones. There was no grass or moss. It was all so dreary, and all so much the same, that even Diggory was thinking that he had better put on their yellow rings and get back to the warm, green, living forest of the in-between place, when they had come to two huge doors of some metal that might possibly be gold. One stood a little ajar, so, of course, they went to look in. Both started back and drew a long breath, for there at last was something worth seeing. For a second they thought the room was full of people. Hundreds of people, all seated, all perfectly still. Polly and Diggory, as you may guess, stood perfectly still themselves for a good long time, looking in, but presently they decided that what they were looking at could not be real people. There was not a movement, nor the sound of breath among them at all. And they were like the most wonderful waxworks you ever saw. This time Polly took the lead. There was something in this room there was something in the room which interested her more than it interested Diggory. All the figures were wearing magnificent clothes. If you were interested in clothes at all, you could hardly help going in to see them closer. And the blaze of colors made this room look not exactly cheerful, but at any rate rich and majestic after all the dust and emptiness of the others. It had more windows, too, and was a good deal lighter. I can hardly describe the clothes. The figures were all robed, and they had crowns upon their heads. Their robes were crimson and silvery gray, deep purple and vivid green. There were patterns and pictures of flowers and strange beasts in needlework all over them. Precious stones of astonishing size and brightness stared from their crowns and hung in chains round their necks, and peeped out from all the places where anything was fastened. Why haven't these clothes all rotted away a long time ago?" asked Polly. "Magic," whispered Diggory. "Can't you feel it? I bet this whole room just stiff with enchantments. I could feel it the moment we came in." "Well, any one of those dresses would have cost hundreds of pounds," said Polly. But Diggory was more interested in the faces. Indeed, these were well worth looking at. The people sat with their stone chairs on each side of the room. The floor was left free down the middle. You could walk down and look at the faces in turn. "They were nice people, I think," said Diggory. Polly nodded. All the faces that they could see were certainly nice. Both the men and women looked kind and wise. They seemed to come from a handsome race, but after the children had gone a few steps down the room, they came to faces that had looked a little different. These were very solemn faces. You felt that you would have to mind your P's and Q's if you ever met living people who looked like that. When they had gone a little further, they found themselves among the faces that they didn't like. This was about the middle of the room. Their faces looked very strong and proud and happy, but they looked cruel. A little further on they looked crueler, and further on again they were still cruel, but they no longer looked happy. There were even despairing faces, as if the people they belonged to had done dreadful things, suffered dreadful things in turn. The last figure of all was most interesting, A woman even more richly dressed than the others, very tall, but every figure in the room was taller than the people of our world, with a look of such fierceness and pride that it took your breath away. Yet she was beautiful too. Years afterwards, when he was an old man, Diggory had said he had never in all of his life known a woman so beautiful. It's only fair to add that Polly always said she couldn't see anything specially beautiful about her. This woman, as I said, was the last, but there was plenty of empty chairs beyond her, as if the room had been intended for a much larger collection of images.
"Well, I do wish I knew the story behind all this," said Diggory. "Let's go back and look at the table sort of thing in the middle of the room."
The thing in the middle of the room was not exactly a table. It was a square pillar about 4 feet high, and on it there rose a little golden arch, from which there hung a little golden bell. Beside this there lay a little golden hammer to hit the bell with.
"Why, I wonder, I wonder,"
said Diggory.
"Well, there seems to be something written here,"
said Polly, stooping down and looking at the side of the pillar.
"Well, by gum, so there is," said Diggory. "But of course we shan't be able to read it."
"Well, shan't we? I'm not so sure," said Polly. They both looked at it hard, and as you might have expected, the letters cut into the stone were strange. But now a great wonder happened, for as they looked, though the shapes of the strange letters never altered, they found that they could understand them. If only Diggory had remembered what he himself had said a few minutes ago, that this was an enchanted room, he might have guessed that the enchantment was beginning to work, but he was too wild with curiosity to think about that. He was looking more and more, what was written on the pillar. He was longing to know more and more to know what was written on the pillar. My goodness, how can I do it? 3, 2, 1, there we go. He was longing more and more to know what was written on the pillar, and very soon they both knew. What was said was something like this. At least, the sense of it, though, the poetry, when you read it there, was better. Make your choice, adventurous stranger. Strike the bell and hide the danger, or wonder till it drives you mad. What would have followed if you had?
"Well, no fear," said Polly. "We don't want any danger." "Oh, but don't you see it's no good," said Diggory. "We can't get out of it now. We shall always be wondering what else would have happened if he had struck the bell. Well, I'm not going home and be driven mad by always thinking of that. No fear."
"Well, don't be silly," said Polly. "As if anyone would. What does it matter what would have happened?"
"Well, I expect anyone who's come as this far is bound to go on wondering till it sends them dotty. Well, that's the magic of it. You see, I can feel it beginning to work on me already."
Well, I don't," said Polly, crossly. "And I don't believe you do either. You're just putting on."
"Well, that's all you know," said Diggory. "That's because you're a girl. Girls don't want to know anything but gossip and rot about people and getting engaged."
"You look exactly like your uncle when you said that," said Polly.
"Why can't you keep to the point?" said Diggory. "What we're talking about is
how exactly like a man," said Polly in a grown-up voice, but added hastily in her real voice, "and don't say I'm just like a woman, or you'll be a beastly copycat. You'll be a beastly copycat."
Well, I should never dream of calling a kid like you a woman, said Diggory loftily.
"Oh, I'm a kid, am I?" said Polly, who was now in a real rage.
"Well, you needn't be bothered by having a kid with you any longer. I'm off. I've had enough of this place, and I've enough of you too, you beastly stuck-up obstinate pig." "Obstinate pig." "Well, none of that," said Diggory, in a voice even nastier than he meant to be, for he saw Polly's hand moving to her pocket and to get a hold of her yellow ring. I can't excuse what he did next, except by saying that he was very sorry for it afterwards, and so were a good many other people. Before Polly's hand reached her pocket, he grabbed her wrist, leaning across with his back against her chest, then keeping her other arm out of the way with his other elbow, he leaned forward, picked up the hammer, and struck the little golden bell, a light, smart tap. Then he let her go, and they fell apart, staring at each other, breathing hard. Polly was just beginning to cry, not with fear, and not even because he had hurt her wrist quite badly, but furious with anger. Within 2 seconds, however, they had something to think about that drove their own quarrels out of their minds. As soon as the bell was struck, it gave out a note, a sweet note such as you might have expected, and not very loud. But instead of dying away again, it went on, and as it went on, it grew louder. Before a minute had passed, it was twice as loud as it had been to begin with. Owie. To begin with, it was soon so loud that if the children had tried to speak, but they weren't thinking of speaking now, they were just standing there with their mouths open, they would not have heard one another. Very soon it was so loud that they could not have heard one another even by shouting. And still it grew, all into one note, all on one note, a continuous, sweet sound. The sweetness had something horrible about it, till the air in that great room was throbbing with it, and could feel the stone floor trembling under their feet. Then, at last, it began to be mixed with another sound, a vague, disastrous noise, which sounded first like the roar of a distant train, and then like a crash of a falling tree. They heard something like great weights falling, finally with a sudden rush and thunder, a shake that nearly flung them off their feet. About a quarter of the room at the end of the room fell in. The end of the room fell in. Great blocks of masonry fell in all around them, and the walls rocked. The noise of the bell stopped. The clouds of the dust cleared away, and everything became quiet again. It was never found out whether the fall of the roof was due to magic, or whether that unbearably loud sound from the bell just happened to strike a note which was more than those crumbling walls could stand. "There, I hope you're satisfied now. I hope you're satisfied now."
Well, dag nabbit, I don't like that one. Oh. Girl. I'm a grown person.
"There, I hope you're satisfied now,"
Panted Polly. Well, that's not a pant.
"Well, it's all over anyway,"
said Diggory. and both thought that it was. But they had never been more mistaken in their lives. And in the next, Chapter 5, The Deplorable Word. Another day. Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape those who dream by night. I like my life. Okie dokie. So, that'll... that should do it. I love you very much. Good night. I'll turn on your show. Turn out your light. Boop. Hey, cuckoo, man, let's do it. Oh, I'm so cold. I just want to sit here by the fire. So cold. Darn you, why won't you turn on? By pressing the power button. Oop, I heard a noise. Shenanigree. Let's turn this off. Love you. Evvie out.